Welcome to the Roundtable Podcast with me, your host, Michael Baum. Tune in as we have honest and genuine talks about everything real estate and so much more. Let's get to it. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm happy to have Andrea Kalafut here from Hive Engineering, and we're going to get started today. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
I'm flattered.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I always start the same thing, the podcast, with the same question. Who's Andrea Kalafut?
I am an engineer. I'm an engineer. I'm an animal lover. I am the eldest born of 4 children. I grew up in the States, and I moved to Canada in 2007 in Pine Glen with my partner, who is originally from Kodiak, and our 2 dogs and our cat.
Nice. Right on. So that's fun. So you said you grew up in the States. What part of the States did you grow up?
I was born in Omaha, Nebraska. And then when I was very young, we moved to Sioux City, Iowa.
Okay.
So I grew up in the Midwest. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah, middle of the country. Yeah.
Right on. So,
People call it flyover country.
yeah, that's great. So where'd you go to school? What was...
So I went to university at the University of Iowa. I got my bachelor's degree in civil engineering in 2003 and my master's degree in December of 2004 in environmental engineering.
Okay, well, that's great. So you grew up there, you went to university, graduated 2004. So what happened from 2004 to 2007 until you moved back here, and what made you move to Canada?
So when I graduated, I got a job in Los Angeles, which actually the person that hired me thought that I was a specialist in wastewater treatment, which I was not. So when I got there, he was kind of surprised. He was kind of like, I didn't hire you for the right thing. So anyway, that was fine, and started working for a small company there in Southern California. And my partner was also working there. He had graduated from the University of New Brunswick the year before, and we met in LA. And then when the housing market crashed in late 06, early 07, there wasn't as much work going on. So we were doing mostly residential subdivision work, water, sewer, roads, that kind of thing. And when the housing market tanked, there was just less work opportunity there. And we'd been looking at a semi-detached that was an hour away from the office that was about, $400,000, which at that time in 07 was just not reasonable. So he said, okay, let's pack up. My family lives in New Brunswick. And I was like, New Jersey? And then we basically moved to New Brunswick in 07 and just never left.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So you met your New Brunswick partner in Los Angeles and moved to Moncton, or I guess the Greater Moncton area.
Yes,
That's a cool story, actually, right there, right in itself.
Most people are like, do you ever regret that? LA was nice for a couple years. It's beautiful. The weather's great, but it's hard to have an identity because there's so many people, and it's just hard to find yourself. Right. So I struggled with that when I was there. So.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely. That's a big difference in a bigger city. It doesn't matter where it is, but definitely a bigger city. Do you get to go home and visit quite a bit?
My family's pretty scattered now. My parents retired to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I have a sister in Washington, D.C., a brother in Atlanta, Georgia, and a sister in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So. Oh, cool.
Going home. Really a home base anymore. So.
Yeah, I've been through most of those cities. My son goes to college in St. Louis, so we did the whole drive through the States all the way and up and down. Went through Canada, but also went through the States from Boston to New York to Philly to Pittsburgh. Went through Cincinnati earlier. Went through Cincinnati a few weeks ago, going through the entire place, like Louisville, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Awesome.
What made you get into engineering?
I don't think I put a lot of thought into my career when I was young. I was very good at science and math, and I like to excel. You get drawn to things that you're good at. And also going to art school wasn't something that my parents really wanted me to do. So my mother one day was like, why not go into engineering? And my mom is a medical was a medical technologist, so she worked at a hospital, and my father was a lawyer. So I really didn't know what engineers did.
Yeah.
But I thought, okay, I'll sign up for engineering school. I really enjoyed it. The first 2 years, I was good at it: chemistry, physics, math, like all those science-based courses. When I got into my third year, I went into the biomedical stream. And for the first year, I liked it. And then when I thought about what my career was actually going to look like, it's more like lab work. And I don't want to pigeonhole this into just this, but it was designing prosthesis,
Okay.
devices, medical.
Makers.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Medical devices like that. And that's not what I saw myself doing. So I worked one summer for an architectural firm, and I loved architecture. So I thought I would do structural engineering. And I had a boss at the time that I said, I want to build the neatest bridges, the coolest buildings. He wasn't cynical. He really wasn't. But he said, do you know why most buildings are square? And I said, no. And he said, because it's cheaper. Like, that's why all buildings are so boring, is because it's the cheapest way
Yeah.
to build them. And I thought, I don't want to be just designing connections, like structural connections, for the rest of my life. So I ended up kind of circling back into environmental, and that's just where I landed. Once I got there at the age of, 23, 24, I started thinking about like when I was younger, and I wrote a paper in the 7th grade, which would have been 80, like 89, like in the late 80s,
Yeah.
about climate change. And that was my middle school
Okay.
project. So even though I'd kind of lost connection with that, I just kind of circled back around to it when I got into my 20s and was very happy to do that. So
Wow. So you did always have something about environment.
yeah,
It was always on top of your mind from a young age.
yeah, I would say
So
yeah.
it kind of made you go right into that realm. That I guess naturally, and not, I guess, without being natural, but at the same time, it went naturally.
Yeah, I found my way back to where I kind of had started. So it worked out. Yeah.
When you moved back in 2007, where did you start working in the engineering firm here in Moncton? And how did that all started?
I basically decided the company that I had worked for in California was very small, and it had been acquired by a very, very large company. And I saw the change from what it felt like working for a smaller company. When I say smaller, I mean about 700 people. I'm not talking 5 or 6, like 700. But we were bought by a company of 10,000. And I immediately saw the difference between the two organizations. So when I moved back here, or when we moved back here, I basically said, okay, I'm going to find a small-ish company, because the big company was not a right fit for me. And that's
Mhm.
something I always encourage my young students to think about is, do you fit better in a big organization, or do you fit better in a small organization? Because they're two different experiences,
Mhm.
without question. So I came and worked for a small company, and I had applied for a technologist position. And when I went to the interview, the person interviewing me said, well, can you just run the division like in our Moncton branch? And me being a keener, I was like, sure, I don't know what I'm doing, but
Why
I can figure it out.
Why not?
So started in September of 2007, working on my engineering career here in New Brunswick. Yeah.
So when did you start your own business, and what made that decision in your head to say, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to start my own company.
I think I always had an inkling for entrepreneurship. It's just a function of when you recognize that, or when you realize that you can do it, you have the confidence in yourself that you can do it. The thing that kind of pushed me over the edge was the company that I worked for before. There was a fairly substantial leadership change, like at the top.
Okay.
It just wasn't a good fit for me anymore. It was just a shift in how they kind of viewed things and how they wanted to do things, and different people in different roles. And that was the point in time where I decided to make my exit. Yeah.
Make your exit and do
Yeah.
your own thing.
Yeah.
Was it easy starting your own business? Like just getting out there and getting a name, getting a logo and starting?
Actually, that was a really fun experience. Razor Creative, that I believe is no longer, they've been acquired by another firm, but I went to see them because, in my opinion, if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. And I wanted a name that embodied who we were, who the company was going to be. And originally, like, you go through this whole process. So originally, the Razor people had given us a list of all these different names of companies that we possibly could be. And the first choice that we had was Tangent, was actually Tangent Engineering. And then when the lawyers got a hold of that and they ran it through all the company names, like across the country,
Yeah.
they found other businesses. They said, okay, there could be a conflict here, a conflict here. So we went through the the exercise again. Razor had wanted us to be the Hive, which at the time, because we didn't have a brand, seemed really aggressive, even though I liked it. So we modified it to Hive Engineering so that people would know what we did. And now that we're 10 years in almost, we kind of refer to it internally as the Hive because we feel like we've got enough brand recognition that we can kind of migrate over to that. So
you got there.
so yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so that's interesting. The early days. So for anybody looking to maybe they're in a position now, want to do their own thing. How was the early days of having your own business, finding work, finding jobs? How was all that?
It was actually a lot of fun, if I'm being honest. I think one of the reasons that we were so successful kind of right out of the gate was because after I learned my craft, which I spent like probably the first 6-7 years of my career in New Brunswick trying to figure out what am I doing technically? How do I understand provincial regulations, provincial legislation? I need to know the regulators. I need to establish relationships with them so that they know me by name, so that if I have a question, I pick up the phone, I give them a call. The latter 3 or 4 years of my career with my former employer was just all about establishing relationships, developers, with bankers, with lenders, with pretty much anybody that I could. So the transition on my end was pretty seamless. We had a lot of clients on day one, just knowing me, and I had 2 partners at the time, knowing the 3 of us and our capabilities. They were happy for us. They wanted to continue working with us.
Wanted to
So
help.
yeah. So my experience in the greater, New Brunswick, Moncton area, whatever you want to refer to it as, has been phenomenal. Everybody's been so supportive of us, and it's just been amazing for a person who came here in 2007 and didn't know anybody to be able to build a business that's based on relationships is amazing. And I don't take full credit for that. This community deserves a lot of credit for that.
Oh, wow. That's well, that's nice of you to say for sure. I'm sure a lot of people listening will appreciate that. So what would be like the most common jobs that you guys do at Hive? So what would be your bread and butter jobs?
We have a couple. So one of the biggest ones would be like phased environmental site assessments. So if you're going to get a mortgage on a property, the bank wants securities that your land is not contaminated. So we will go in and we'll do an assessment to give you an idea of what kind of environmental liabilities that you might have on that property. So things like oil tanks, asbestos in building materials. What was the history of the property? I'll never forget this. We did a job in Port Elgin, and we had aerial photographs from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it was always just farmland. So the bank at the time was like, I don't think we need a phase 1. But the client had called me anyway. And we went and we found a 1934 fire insurance plan, like 1930s. And it was an old Imperial bulk petroleum storage facility.
Wow.
That you would never know had you not gone back to the 30s.
Yeah.
So
I didn't even know it existed down in that way either.
Exactly. So that's kind of one of our primary things. The other big pieces would be, and we're branching out into other areas very, very quickly too, but wetland delineation work and watercourse alteration permitting, wetland alteration permitting. We do a lot of that work, which is basically wetlands are regulated under the Clean Water Act in New Brunswick, which means that if you're going to disturb them, you need a permit and possibly compensation in order to recreate that wetland somewhere else if you're going to be given permission to destroy that existing one. And then hazardous materials, so asbestos assessments, lead and paint, other regulated materials that when you go to demolish or renovate a structure, there's certain places certain things can go.
Yeah.
So it's basically like an inventory of what do you have, and when you renovate this, how do you do it, or demolish it, how do you do it safely, and make sure that all the regulated substances go to the right either recycling or disposal facility.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you do remedy as well, not only.
Yep. We do remediation work when it's necessary. And we typically like to use that as a secondary option to risk assessment. And then also another big one that's big right now would be mold, indoor air quality. A lot of people are nervous about the air quality inside their residences or their places.
So you do that as well?
Business. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So So it's not just commercial, because commercial jobs, you do also residential.
Yep, we do residential as well. It's hard a lot of times for people to wrap their heads around the cost associated with like the single family type of work, but a lot of that is really just the analytical costs. It's
Okay.
not necessarily our time, but when the lab gets our samples, they charge a certain amount of money to do that
To the
analysis. And
analysis.
that's just a flow through cost,
Okay.
basically. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my career, in 2003, when we started doing the golf course, Fox Creek, well, hence the name Fox Creek, there were 7 holes going across the creek. So we had to do all the environmental assessments of what will the fish habitat. So we've done that throughout the year, water course alterations, quite familiar with some of the stuff. And also on my real estate side with commercial properties that are for sale, a lot of the commercial lenders will ask what's there, what's not there. To what you were saying with Port Elgin, I had a client wanting to buy a piece of property on John Street in Moncton, and it was just a parking lot. And it was a parking lot since anybody could really know that it was there. Nobody really had any information until we dug deep into it and found out that in the 30s or 40s, I'm not sure when it was, there was a gas station there. There was fuel. Once we started to look at it, the project didn't really make sense anymore. Do you have any projects or times where you've got into a project that it was too late, that somebody already had made the leap and then call you later and you're like, this is not great. You have to do this. You have to do that, because it's better to hire you guys ahead of time than later on.
I tell people that the phase 1, which is just that records review, where we're going out and looking at all the old mapping, the old aerial photographs, the fire insurance plans, we can usually get things back to the 20s, 30s, depending on where you're at in the province, even as early as the late 1800s. If you think about investing in a, $500,000, $1 million property, a phase 1 is, $3,000. It's basically an insurance policy. I mean, if we just want to boil it down to what it is, it's an insurance policy, because at that point in time we're saying, hey, you're good or you're not good. And that's why engineers are insured. Now, I'd like to think we don't miss things, but nobody's perfect. We do have one project that happened like that just within the last few weeks. The client had contacted us for just like some very preliminary information, and then went ahead and decided to buy the land at pennies on the dollar. I don't know the exact financials, but it was a steal of a deal. And then when they went in to do the development work, they did find 2 tanks on the property, which thankfully were not leaking. They were empty, and they had to incur the cost to get them out. But I would argue at that point in time, whatever they paid for the real estate would have, if they had paid it at fair market value, would have covered the cost of the removal of the tanks. Now, had those tanks been leaking and there was a huge problem and it was on the neighbors' properties, that is a different story.
Yeah. I've seen that before too, where there's a tank leakage, but it seeps through another property. And then I know one time there was a job and the tank was leaking on my client's property, but when the people did something on their property, they remedied only their side and not the other side. But then they said, oh, the issue was not on our side, it was on the other side. And then everybody needed to get together. It found out that the initial culprit was, in fact, the other side, not my client's side. So then they had to remedy the whole situation. But once there's a leak, that's because the disposal of that material is you need to bring it to specific sites, and it's extremely costly.
It is extremely costly. And you bring up a good point about third-party impact. So basically, that's the terminology we use. If a tank on your property and it leaks on your neighbor's property, that neighbor's property is what we call third-party impacted. The way that the regulators look at contamination in the ground is, okay, is it going to hurt anybody? Okay. So if we were going to go in and do an assessment on, let's say, your property, which has a tank, and that tank leaked onto your neighbor's property, as long as we can demonstrate that contamination can safely stay in the ground. So by that, I mean, nobody's going to eat it, touch it, drink it, or inhale fumes from it. They basically are the kind of risk that we look at,
Mm-hmm.
it can safely stay in the ground. So you as the source property owner with the contamination on you can get everything finalized with the province leaving it in the ground. Now, that being said, if your neighbor goes to build a shed and there's contamination in the ground and all of a sudden they have to start digging for that foundation, I haven't been involved in a lot of those situations, but at that point in time, unless the neighbor goes to the source property owner and says, hey, I want you to pay for this, and they say, no, I'm not paying for that, now you're in a
Legal tussle
situation.
Yeah, and those aren't fun either. So it's always better to contact, I guess, when you're buying something, especially, would you say everywhere or especially in like real downtown areas? But would you say, like, I guess with your Port Elgin story, I guess it can be anywhere, but would you recommend everybody to get not to get you more business there,
no.
Would you recommend most people to get a phase one if they're buying raw land?
So I definitely don't like that. I don't want this to be a self-serving question, but a lot of times when my clients do call me and it's raw land or it's something that they feel is very, very low risk, rather than the reason you're paying $3,000 is for that policy and something in writing. But sometimes my clients will call me and say, hey, I really don't think this is a problem. Can you look at it for me? And we have all the fire insurance plans in a library in our office. We have all aerial photographs in a library in our office. So do a quick peek. We can scan Service New Brunswick, see if there's Land Gazette information. We can kind of wrap our heads around whether we think, yes, you should pay for the full phase one, or, hey, listen, this looks like it's pretty low risk. How do you want to proceed? Do you want the paperwork to cover yourself, or do you feel comfortable with just us having a quick peek at stuff for you and kind of giving you a warm and fuzzy feeling?
Yeah, that leads me to one question. I'm going to start looking at my notes here, and we're just going to keep bantering, but that's great. But it leads me to one question I had here is, how is AI changing engineering, or where do you see AI changing engineering in 5 to 10 years? Because you're saying, oh, we have that in the library, in our office, we have this. Where will it help you guys have information quicker, easier? How do you see AI being a challenge or a change in your industry?
I guess I'll just speak to the environmental piece because that's what we do. And there's probably so many applications for mechanical, electrical, structural engineering that I could not speak to. And
No,
I'm sure probably more applicable.
Yes, but specifically for hive engineering.
I'm not a tech guru by any stretch of the imagination. But most of what we do is go out in the field and get samples. So we're going out, we're getting samples, whether it's building materials, whether it's soil, whether it's water. We do a lot of work at landfill sites. So in order to have an approval to operate a landfill site, you have to do annual testing. So until there's robots doing work, I think we're pretty okay for the next little while. Is there some internal processes that could be somewhat streamlined and more automated as far as like databases with information, maybe a little bit of report writing? Aside from that, I really can't see it affecting us too much in the short term anyways.
Yeah, because you have to analyze and actually do it that way. That makes sense.
Hope so anyway.
So engineering can seem quite a bit technical from the outside. How important are relationships? You touched on it earlier, but how important are relationships, communication, and trust in your business? How important is that in your line of work?
Critical. If you can't, so again, I'm coming from the consulting perspective, which is I advise other people about engineering, environmental engineering matters, right? Most of my clients are not engineers, and we take pride as a business on explaining things so our clients understand it at their level. Because if they don't understand, a lot of people don't read our reports. They flip to the last page and where it says no additional work is required, and they're like, "Okay, I'm good to go." And I'll give you a good example of that. So a lot of times when we close these contaminated sites files, what we're doing is leaving the contamination in the ground and saying it can safely stay there. So if you scroll down where it says no additional work is required, and you don't recognize that there's still impact, well, at that point in time,
if you dig it up,
you have to do something with it. That communication error can be very, very costly if the owner doesn't understand that.
Right.
So I would say communication is is huge. And trust comes into play. If your clients don't trust you, they're not going to call you again. They have to trust what we're saying is accurate without question. Yeah.
No, that's a very good point, and I would agree to that. How different is environmental engineering compared to some of the other engineering? We touched on mechanical, electrical, structural. How different is it? And are you happy you decided to go into that route compared to the others?
They're all so different that anybody that's interested in science or math, you can find a stream in engineering that you will like. I can almost guarantee it. I very much am glad I'm in the environmental space. Wish I would like our company to get more involved in the climate change discussion. We just don't have that skill set in-house. A lot of that's on the mechanical side. So designing energy efficient mechanical systems for buildings, civil engineering, water systems, road, sanitary sewer systems. I think people, the everyday person, drives down the road and doesn't understand that there's a 4-foot diameter pipe in the road that is conveying all the water every time it rains, or every time you flush a toilet, or every time you turn on your sink. So there's so much going on in that engineering space. It's actually quite amazing when you think about it.
A lot of it is hidden. That's why.
Well, I did a presentation for some kids in California when I lived there. They were in middle school, and I was trying to explain to them like the wastewater water cycle. And so I was being very simple, but I kind of wanted to get the point across that, if you're in Northern California and you flush your toilet, that goes through a water treatment system, and then it gets discharged to the environment. It goes out. And then somewhere downstream, somebody's probably going to pick that water up, put it into another treatment system, and then put it into your sinks, like for drinking water. And they were like, "Ew, we're drinking poo water." Didn't understand how the water cycle worked and how engineers basically design that infrastructure to not only eliminate wastewater, but also to create drinking water. It's great place to be.
And for me, my father started 1985. His business was doing sewer and water works in municipalities. So I've grown in that space my entire life, digging holes in the ground and putting pipes for new water lines or water treatment centers and all that kind of stuff. So it's really fascinating to me too, but haven't been able to be right there on the ground and seeing how some of that transpires is definitely interesting.
100%. Yeah.
So what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that we have here in Atlantic Canada when it comes to either municipalities or waterways? Because we do have rivers, we do have creeks, we have the ocean that's not too far away. What are some of the critical challenges that we could have around here? Wetlands now, that's a big one that we're hearing a lot of now. You guys deal with wetlands and delineations. Maybe another question, what has made the delineation process be a little more complex than it was before?
So I wouldn't say it's more complex, but essentially, and again, I'm not a biologist, so I'm very high level on that side of things. I think the higher scrutiny around the wetlands right now is mostly around the climate change discussion and the stormwater management discussion. So wetlands are a carbon sink, which means when carbon is in the atmosphere, they will absorb that carbon. When you eliminate them, it removes the ability for that space on the planet to absorb that carbon. Two, with the stormwater management issue, wetlands basically buffer a lot of water courses and therefore filter the water before it gets to the water course, which obviously protects fish habitat, water quality. And so I think the policies are being rejigged to take into consideration both the climate change aspect of removing them, and second, the ability to protect existing waterways.
So for us, we've been dealing quite a bit lately with, I'm not sure how long ago, would be probably maybe 20 years ago, they started to do the net zero and for stormwater retention, so retention ponds and stormwater retention areas. Do you find that's making a difference in how stormwater is treated? Do you find it's directly impacting the environment at this time?
So this is getting a little bit out of my wheelhouse, just a little. I think the primary driver there is a municipal infrastructure capacity. So for example, the stormwater pipe that goes down Main Street, let's say, which I think, well, I know for certain, not Main Street, but downtown Moncton has combined sewer still in some places because it's so old, which means that the stormwater and the sanitary, meaning the toilets, are all going into one place.
Yeah.
So there are some big pipes downtown. If that pipe was designed for an area of 5 hectares and the city of Moncton has grown to 10 hectares, and again, just even numbers for purposes of discussion, has grown to 10, that pipe hasn't been upgraded to accommodate that 10. Yep. So the reason for that retention is to make sure that the other spaces downtown, if that pipe can't hold that water, you're going to get flooding. So it does, but there's no question that it mitigates against
Yeah, I
flooding.
think so too. Yeah. Are there some instances that it's maybe an overkill? Maybe like anything else. There could be, but I think deep down currently it's making a difference.
From policy perspective, it makes sense.
Yeah. So from your perspective, what separates a successful development project to maybe one that struggles?
Investment on the front end. And I don't necessarily mean strictly financial. I mean, there's a process that should be followed. So in my mind, a lot of times developers have a vision for what they want it to look like. So they're drawing something in 2-dimensional space. They're saying, okay, this is what I want to build. But at that point in time, they haven't taken into consideration the 3-dimensional space, meaning shit flows downhill. So you need a topographic survey. You need to know where your water and your sewer are so that you can connect and make sure that everything can flow downhill and can move off of your property, that you have room for the stormwater retention pond. I would say a lot of times I see developers having an idea that maybe doesn't match the environment.
Yeah.
And making sure that those two things go together is going to save you a lot of headaches in the future. I also think hiring the right consultants and the right contractor is huge. Making sure you have the right construction partner.
I would agree with that 110%. And I would say too that you can't be too careful when you're ensuring that you have the right contracts and ensuring you're doing all the proper work ahead of time. If you need to, the due diligence process before buying something. Oftentimes, I know sellers do not like due diligence process. When you decide you want to sell something, you want to sell it. You don't want to get into a long period of time where you need to do this or that. However, for the purchaser, I think it's one that sometimes they try to make it too fast, but you should take the 60 or 90 days or whatever the time is to make sure that what you're buying is actually what you're buying.
And I'll add to that a lot of times people who are not in the development business, they might just want to buy an apartment building, or it may not be their primary source of income. They don't know what a phase 1 is. They don't know what a building condition assessment is. And they go to the bank and they say, oh, bank, I want to buy this building. And the bank focuses on getting them the money. And then at the 11th hour, the bank will come to you and say, oh, and by the way, we need a phase 1 and a building condition assessment and this and that. And then they call me and they're like, what's this phase 1 and can I have it tomorrow? Because we're closing. And it gets really complicated when we go in and do that phase 1. And then we say, oh, there was an underground tank at this apartment building. And now we're extending it not just 2 or 3 weeks from the closing, we're now extending it 6. If you find contamination, then it can shut a deal down. It can go another year. So if you're thinking about buying a property, I would always recommend that you ask your banker, what things on the checklist do I need at the very start? Because they only seem to think about that at the very end.
Yeah, and that comes into my wheelhouse where I find when you dabble into commercial real estate, you'll see a lot less of that in residential development, because when somebody's building a house on a lot, typically that lot has been, if it's a subdivision, the environmental work had been done previously by the owner.
Correct.
And the city wants to make sure that that land has no contamination or whatever. So you usually do the phase 1 or phase 2 environmental impact assessments at that time. So when you're buying a house, usually, unless somebody's putting an oil tank on it to, if they have a big garage, more in the rural areas, you maybe see a little more of that. On the commercial side, and we're seeing with realtors that just sometimes dabble into commercial, they may not know that the banks will require an environmental impact assessment. And even if they don't, if a client is purchasing a property, let's say cash, and won't need the bank, it's always better to ask for a phase one on. So I do that all the time. And I find sometimes that when you just dabble into it, the realtors have a responsibility as well to provide that information to their buyers. For that person, that's not what they do.
Yeah.
And they just want an investment. If anybody takes away anything from this conversation today, should be top of mind.
Without question. I've seen cash sales, obviously, and we usually end up getting the call after somebody's acquired it and they paid cash for it. And now they're trying to sell it or flip it to somebody else. And that buyer is saying, no, I want a phase one. And then we find a problem and they're saying, well, I bought this with cash. And I'm like, you were done a disservice because now you're kind of stuck with it, or at least incurring the cost of whatever additional assessment would need to be done. The other thing I think about on that front that I don't think a lot of people are thinking too much about is the cost for asbestos abatement if you do have it. So asbestos.
Yeah, that's one that I dabbled more into all new stuff.
All new stuff.
I'm curious to hear about that.
So asbestos is regulated under the Occupational Health and Safety Act in New Brunswick. So it's not locally regulated by any municipality, which my opinion is that it should be part of a demolition permit process. I think you should have to have an asbestos assessment to get a demolition permit for buildings built prior 85-ish. Anyway, that's my opinion. But so
you have that opinion because of things that have transpired and happened.
So for example, we were doing some work and this just goes to show a lot of times asbestos can safely stay in a building. But according to legislation, if you do have asbestos, it's the owner's responsibility to have an asbestos management plan, which means in the event, hypothetical again, that a pipe ruptures in the building in the middle of the night and all the drywall compound in the basement or the plaster, everything has asbestos in it. And you're calling contractors saying, come in here and clean this up. Well, they need to know whether or not that material contains asbestos because it determines how they safely fix that problem. The banks don't necessarily require that. And our industry tends to be very soft on it by saying you might have asbestos in your building. If asbestos is present, then you need an asbestos management plan. Well, the owner doesn't care because they want to buy, or the purchaser, excuse me. And the bank doesn't care because they're basically saying, okay, it can stay there. But to put that into perspective, we did some work on a building a few years ago, and the local contractor that was going to do the demolition and disposal of the building basically said, okay, the cost is $100,000, assuming there's no asbestos. So we get the call, we go and we do testing, and we find it in the plaster. So this is somewhat of an extreme example because plaster is highly friable, meaning that you can crush it by your hand. Now, if it's in a floor tile, that's not as easily disturbed such that you can hail it. But when it comes to plaster, you could easily be exposed to that. We did the testing on the plaster. It had asbestos. And when they went back to the demolition contractor for pricing, it had gone from $100,000 to $450,000. So four times the cost.
Wow.
So that just gives you one example. It's a fairly extreme example, but what the cost associated with abatement can look like.
How do you test for asbestos, and how can somebody initially looking at an older building have some quick insight of what's a quick look that you go, ooh, maybe you want to get that checked?
Obviously, the biggest one we see in like single family res would be vermiculite insulation, which basically is like granular material that would be used as wall insulation. So like between your exterior wall and your interior wall.
Like blown in insulation, but like not the older stuff.
Yeah, it's not blown, but it's
but it looks like blown insulation.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. And then if I'm being honest, in other buildings pre-85, it can be in your drywall compound. So
you wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know unless you test for it. Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you test for it?
So we go in and we basically will cut whatever we're sampling, vinyl floor tile, glues, mat, roofing materials, asphalt shingles, drywall compound. We basically we wet everything down with like a spray bottle so that we're minimizing the amount of dust that is generated. We're collecting a sample of that material with like a cutting knife. We double bag it in Ziploc. We put it in a cooler and we ship it to our laboratory for analysis.
That's interesting. I like that part of it.
And if I can switch gears, I wanted to go back to something else you were talking about on the environmental impact assessment side of things. So when you said, how do you make projects more successful? If you were in your situation with the golf course and the single-family residential subdivisions, a lot of those will trigger an environmental impact assessment. So not an environmental site assessment, but environmental impact assessment. That is a year-long process, usually at best.
Yeah.
And it's very much, a lot of the studies are very seasonal. So
good point.
You have to
we just got through that. Yeah.
So rare plants, and again, I'm not the biologist, but rare plants are typically done in late July. Birds, in Atlantic Canada, they suggest between June and August is when you're going to have the most birds nesting here. It is illegal under the MBCA, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, to destroy a bird or a bird's nest. So all of these, if you're planning your project, make sure that if you're going to start on day one, I would suggest starting early spring, late spring, so you can hit all of those critical study points of wetland delineation, which in New Brunswick is June 1 to September 30th, with the ability to do out-of-season delineations depending on how much rain we've gotten, how dry it is, like what's actually going on in the environment. If you start in August for an EIA, you can go ahead and start it, but you're going to wait till the entire next summer to do all your studies, and you're really only getting something submitted the following year. So something else.
And the report will only come your year and a half easy.
Yep. The Department of Environment has 90 days to review the first submission and submit comments, but that iteration process I've seen them go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations. It just depends on how many questions they have.
How big the land is.
How big the land is and what the quality of your response is. There's also public consultation and First Nations engagement considerations with that process as well, which can also just take time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. All good stuff. And I could talk on and on and on about that. I have a bunch more questions. I want to maybe switch gears at this time. One question I have. So engineering has been known as being, a male-dominated industry for the last 100 years, and you being a female in that field, how has that industry evolved, and how have you found some challenges throughout the years initially getting into that business without getting into too much of the nitty gritty? But how has it been, and would you recommend other young women or older women liking math and environmental to get into the field?
100%. There's no question. I will say.
Would you like to have more?
100%. 100%. We're pretty close to, we're over 50-50 female to male ratio. That being said, we're a very young company. Myself and another manager are the oldest, and we're mid 40s. What I can say is when I went to university, although there was fewer girls, I was always a tomboy, so it didn't bother me that it was mostly men. The gals that were there were very similar to me as well, like kind of tomboyish. And when you were in university, there was no different. You wouldn't have even thought of it. Then when I moved to California, I would say the same thing. It was when I moved here and I started doing field work, you'd go out to some of the construction sites and you'd get the odd hey, honey, go put on your swimsuit and then come back. And I'm the type of person that it's a joke. I can take a joke, and I'd be like, okay, buddy, pound sand, whatever, So you get a little bit of that. But for the most part, everybody was awesome to me. It was only when I started to get into management that I felt like I wasn't being heard as much as everybody else. Which is part of the reason why I decided to
you mean management of another company, a bigger company?
In senior management.
One person of a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah. And I was the only female at that time that was in management. And anyway, I had a lot of supporters in that role and a lot of people that did not support me in that role, which is ultimately why I ended up where I did. And it's amazing to me. I've got other senior male managers in my organization right now and lots of male employees, and they have nothing but respect for me. And they're nothing but awesome. And I can tell you
That's
that
awesome.
most of my clients also not a thing. Like it's just it. I know that the struggle was real in the past, but I do think it's evolving. I think it's evolving very quickly.
You would definitely suggest to
100%.
others to pursue
100%. I coached soccer for 8 years at Salisbury High School, and I always told those kids, the female girls soccer team, I would tell them, if any of you guys want it, if you guys like science and math and you want, I will give you a summer job. You come work for me. Actually, one of the gals, I think, took me up on it, and she graduated this year from UNB. She was the president of the Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. She's been with us for 4 summers, and she starts full-time in June.
Wow, that's awesome. I love those stories. That's great.
Me too.
It's great. Now, Hive Engineering's been 10 years?
February 2017. So we're just finishing up our, we're going into our
And now you have how many employees?
Right now, today, we're 24.
24 employees.
We've got an office in Sydney, Nova Scotia, Halifax, St. John, and Moncton. Yeah.
And what's the future looking like for Hive Engineering? Where are you going? Stopping there? Are you growing? What's the next steps?
What's the next steps? We're looking at a possible acquisition of another small firm. I think that'll probably be a positive thing for us. It'll add some additional service lines for us to tackle. I think we've experienced so we were 12 people last year and now we're 24. I kind of need to pump the brakes a little bit and get everything kind of settled in and experience the level that we're at right now, because the last thing I would want to do is bite off more than we could chew and not have that be sustainable, because the number one thing that matters to me, and I've always told this to all my employees, is they're all that matter to me. Like, the important thing to me is making sure they have a paycheck, that they have great careers, that they're happy, they can feed their kids, make their mortgages, make their car payments. So I take my job as the leader of the company very seriously.
So what do you find the toughest as with growing? What are the growing pains?
For me, it was letting go. So when we were small, I could kind of control everything, and I like every little detail, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so one of the biggest things for me was having to let go some of what I was doing and let other people take responsibility. And that was hard for me in the last couple of years, because this is my baby, right?
Yeah.
But it had to be done. So that was a personal struggle for me. It was just kind of letting go and saying, okay, I trust you guys. You're going to do a great job, and they will. But inside me, I'm like, okay, everything has to be perfect. And I was like, nothing's ever perfect. So that was probably my biggest struggle over the last 2 years, is just kind of being able to let go and embrace the growth rather than keep everything in. Yeah. And stress myself right out.
Delegation, it's a big thing. It's tough to do, but you're only as good as your team. When you start to empower them, then they start to grow their own wings and they start to fly. And then all of a sudden you're going places you never thought you'd be going.
And that's kind of so we just brought on 3 people in St. John. And they primarily do a lot of pipeline work. So basically the pipeline from Maine through to Nova Scotia. And that's something that I don't know anything about, but I just know that these people are great at what they do. And they've been doing it since they built the pipeline here in New Brunswick. So I don't have a choice. I gotta let them fly.
So that leads me to another question of, Hive Engineering currently is more so an environmental company. Are you going to stick to that, or are you growing into other areas of engineering in the next year, saying like the pipeline stuff or all that? Are you going to do like civil work?
So I'll speak to that a little bit. One of the reasons that I think small businesses can grow is because you collaborate with other small engineering businesses, right? So we have partners in Moncton, in St. John, in Halifax, like all throughout the Maritimes, and they're very strategic and are important to us. So are we going to expand some of our services? Yeah, we're looking at geospatial. We've got a fella out of St. John that is kind of a genius when it comes to mapping and geospatial type resources. We may look into something like that. There's a lot of work going on up north, like in Northwest Territories, Nunavut, like those regions, that we've got a biology crew that are interested in doing that. So we're looking at more remote work for sure. We will expand some of our services, but if we do, they will be in strategic locations and not necessarily across the board, because we still are very respectful of our current partners that we do a lot of work with, and it's mutually beneficial. So
we're kind of at the end of the conversation. Is there anything that I didn't ask and you would like to maybe touch on that?
I don't know. I guess one other thing that just comes to mind on the environmental side that we don't have much to do with, but should maybe be taken into consideration. You just keep seeing these drought warnings, like we're in extreme drought, we're in extreme drought, we're in extreme drought. And that's not a good place to be with as many people in rural New Brunswick that are on drinking water wells. I think you're going to see more scrutiny on the water supply source assessment side of things. So if you've gone through rural subdivisions, I'm assuming you've gone through the WASA process, which is basically like the pump testing to make sure there's enough water in the aquifer. I think that will probably be more scrutinized in the future with the increase in drought. I'd heard something on the CBC the other day that they were maybe talking about restricting water use even for like municipal users. So that's something else that was kind of in the forefront of my mind when it comes to some of these developments too. Well, I'll also add to that, we've done some subdivision work in some areas where the owner will decide to have a central private water system. They'll drill one big well and it'll service, let's say, 20 units or 30 units, 40 units. And this is somewhat popular out like towards Grand Barrachois.
Okay.
One, I know the province doesn't like them for a number of reasons. What happens if there's no water in that well? Who's responsible? Or what happens if the pump breaks down? Or what happens if all of a sudden the water quality is bad and you have too much manganese, or you have too much whatever, or the well goes dry? Who's responsible for that? When it comes to municipalities, you know where you're getting your water from. The municipality is responsible for that water.
Yeah.
When you have your own private well, that's your problem. With these smaller centralized distribution systems, that can be very tricky. And it's something to take in consideration if you're considering, one, developing that type of system, or two, buying a home in that type of development. I would make sure that there's a really strong homeowners association agreement, or that's what we call it in the States anyway, like an HOA that defines or sets aside a pocket of money to ensure that system is looked after.
Yeah, because that can be extremely costly as well.
Well, especially, and worst case, you don't have water.
Somebody I know in I wouldn't say rural, but in not too far from here, that they're on wells. Last year was the first time they've been living there for 20 years, 25 years. First time the well went dry.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have any water. And when you realize that you don't have any water to do, it's not like having no hot water. It's having no water.
You can't flush your toilet.
You can't brush your teeth.
Yeah.
You can't flush the toilet. You can't do this. You can't do that. It lasted for several weeks, if not a month or two, which was not great.
No. And a lot of people can't afford a new well if you had to go deeper, right? You're looking at $15,000 maybe for a new well, depending on depth. Another thing that I would just recommend for anybody that does have a private drinking water well, Health Canada came out with a new guideline for manganese for the protection of human health a couple years ago. I say a couple, might be even 5. Time flies by so fast now. And before there wasn't a guideline, and it's quite low, and manganese is actually very prevalent in most waters in New Brunswick. So I would definitely recommend people get their drinking water tested. Not necessarily when you buy a home in New Brunswick from a real estate agent, correct me if I'm wrong, and they do the water test, it's for bacteria, correct?
Yeah.
It's total coliforms and E. coli.
You can do it for all.
You can do it for all.
Yeah. Last house I sold in Grand Dig, they did the whole
suite,
the whole thing.
Definitely.
Yeah. And there was magnesium in it, but the water purifying system that they had wasn't working that day because they had the whole purifying system, and ended up they fixed it, and then it was all perfect after that. But yeah, they do the whole thing.
Good. No,
sometimes.
And they should. And I would just add that aside from many other parameters on the list of things that you could test for, my personal well at my home, the manganese was above the guideline, which is why I didn't want a water softener, but we ended up putting one in just to get rid of the manganese.
So what are, as we're coming to the end here, what are some of the hobbies that you do? What do you do for fun? What's a weekend look like when you're not working?
That's few and far between. That being said, I'm not a musical person whatsoever, and I just decided that I should try to expand my own personal skills, just get outside of my engineering and math headspace. I started taking piano lessons this year.
Nice. You play a song yet?
No, don't ask.
I won't ask you to sing either.
No, that won't happen. I've got, like I said, I have my 2 dogs. We love to go to Fundy. We live in Pine Glen, so it's just kind of a quick rip down. Spend a lot of time hiking there. Like to go visit my family. I have a niece and nephew that are 6 and 4, so they're a lot of fun. They live in Cincinnati, so we go see them quite regularly. I like to read.
No kids of your own?
No kids of my own. That was just not for me.
Not in the cards.
No, but we.
But you have your nieces and nephews.
My nieces and nephews, and I've got. I call them my kids, but I have my work kids. I have my people that work for me, and they're like my giant grown children. So, but yeah, nope. We just put our strawberry plants in this past week, and gonna try to get some potatoes and onions in this evening if I can.
Nice. Do you guys take vacation time? What would be a dream vacation for you?
Actually, I think we're gonna do it in September. So typically we're not vacationers, only because we're so work focused, both of us. My partner is the branch manager for another large engineering firm here. So he's got about 30 people, I think, in his office space, and we both love our jobs. So in the past, we've been kind of just trying to get to a plateau. And I feel now with the growth, like I said before, that we've experienced within Hive, I'm ready to even things out before we experience any more growth. So we're actually planning a trip to the Azores Islands in September, October for 2 weeks, which are just off the coast of Portugal. And there's hiking and spelunking and boating and canoeing and kayaking and all kinds of outdoors things. So I actually think I'm going to get to do my dream vacation this fall.
Oh, that's awesome. And I will definitely have to touch base on that because a good friend of mine and old business partner, Pete Luckett, has a place over there in Azores, and 3 years ago we were able to go and visit him in Punta Delgada and at his place, and you definitely need to go there. And
was it awesome?
Pete, shout out to you. Yeah, and so Adonia is the place in Punta Delgada in the Azores Islands, and it's a special, spectacular place. Definitely go. You'll have fun, but also I'll put you in touch with Pete.
Okay. Pete, I'm calling you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We'll make sure of that because it's not often that you hear somebody wanting to go to the Azores Islands as a vacation. So like I said, my wife and I with 3 more couples that we were business partners, we went to see Pete over there, and it's a fantastic island. So anyways, I'm excited for you. I'm a little jealous, to be honest, of you going. So we'll definitely be in touch for that.
Sounds good.
So a couple more questions. If you weren't an engineer, what would you be?
Is money an object?
No.
Money is no object. I don't know. I think I might be like a gardener or like have a greenhouse or a farm stand or something like that. I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about it. I'm quite happy and content in what I do. I'm probably one of those people that I know exactly what I would not want to do versus like exactly what I do want to do.
But it's funny, your answer to what you would want to do if you're not an environmental engineer is still being outside and being with plants and growing things. So,
if any of my staff listen to this, they're going to laugh their asses off because I have 3 plants in my office and they're all dead.
They're all
I can't keep anything alive.
So you have no green thumb.
No, wish I did.
Where can people find you online? Do you have social media?
Yep.
How do people find you?
Yep. We're on LinkedIn. Well, I say Hive Engineering is on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Me personally, I don't do Insta. I'm too old for that.
We're the same age probably, and I do it. So
I know.
Never too old.
Yeah, I don't. When it comes to my business, and obviously I understand that outward facing really matters, and I've got a great guy on staff that manages all of that for us, and he's on top of it. He does a really great job, and so I follow along with everything that he does, and I'm also there, but I try not. I'm I'm not a big social media person.
That's all right. That's all right.
But you can still find us there.
Yeah, well, we can find your company for sure. So that's it for today's episode, Andrea. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate your time. Taking the time to come on the Real Estate Roundtable with Mike LeBlanc today. And so to everyone, you can follow us, click and share the episode. You can like it. You can follow us along on all the podcast platforms. So again, thank you to my guest today, Andrea Kalafut from Hive Engineering.
Thanks,
and
Mike. It's really
till
good
next
to see
time.
you. Yes,
good to see you too.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.